On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union with the largest invasion force in history. This was Operation Barbarossa. With such a large invasion, you would think that there would be leaks of its planning and assembling, right? And even warnings to Soviet leader Josef Stalin. Well, there were. I'm Indy Neidell. This is a World War II special episode about Operation Barbarossa intelligence leaks. Josef Stalin trusted no one. We've seen this not only during the war, but during the entire interwar period, which we covered in the mega series Between Two Wars over on our Time Goes History channel. He trusted no one, certainly not Adolf Hitler, but he also did not trust what was a deluge of intelligence in 1940 and 1941, warning that Germany was going to attack the Soviet Union. Why did he not heed the warnings? Well, it's more than simple distrust, and it caused Stalin and his nation to be woefully unprepared when Germany invaded. German planning for the invasion began already in July 1940 after the fall of France. Adolf Hitler had never disguised his hatred for the Soviet Union and its Judeo-Bolshevik regime, as he called it. But even beyond his personal and ideological reasons for destroying the USSR, his high command had further reasons. On July 31st, 1940, Army Command Chief of Staff Franz Halder wrote some notes after a meeting with Hitler and company that since an invasion of Britain was seeming less and less likely, our action must be directed to eliminate all factors that let England hope for a change in the situation. To all intents and purposes, the war is won. France is no longer part of the setup protecting British convoys. Italy is pinning down British forces. Britain's hope lies in Russia and the United States. If Russia drops out of the picture, America too is lost, for elimination of Russia would tremendously increase Japan's power in the Far East. With Russia smashed, Britain's last hope would be shattered. Germany will then be master of Europe and the Balkans. Hitler, though, did not believe Britain to be his main foe. He feared and loathed the USSR, and he also saw the wide open spaces of Eastern Europe as both Lebensraum and as resources for his people to use and exploit. Hitler also did not think that Britain, who did not have a large standing army, would be able to mobilize on the continent in time to prevent a lightning blitzkrieg against the unprepared USSR, with its armies scattered from the Far East to the Far West. And how would Britain even get to the continent with France under German control? Britain's best hope, according to Hitler, was an alliance with the USSR. Another reason as to why the USSR should be dealt with. But Barbarossa was a badly kept secret. Stalin had pretty detailed intelligence from the Soviet and American espionage rings in Germany, especially from Arvid Harnack, codenamed Corsican, who reported already September 26, 1940, an officer of the Supreme Command of Germany has told Corsican that by the beginning of next year, Germany will be ready for war with the Soviet Union. The objective of the campaign will be to occupy Western European Russia along the Leningrad Black Sea line and the creation of a German vassal state. Stalin also had American government intelligence. Sumner Welles, American Undersecretary of State, gave the Soviet ambassador a stern warning of German plans in March 1940. The government of the United States has come into possession of information which it regards as authentic, clearly indicating that it is the intention of Germany to attack the Soviet Union. A State Department message was also sent directly to Moscow. We saw this in our regular episodes. This intelligence, however, was the handiwork of the American attaché Sam Woods, who served in Berlin and had heavy contacts in Nazi circles. Stalin's reaction to the American warnings was a single word: provocation. He would not be incited against Germany. In March 1941, Japanese Foreign Minister Yosuke Matsuoka went to Berlin, and so a bunch of messages were then sent between Berlin and Tokyo. American cryptanalysts running Operation Magic against the Japanese code system Purple deciphered them and read Hitler's comment hinting that a German-Soviet war might soon break out. There were more messages along this line until a mid-April one discussing Hitler's specific plans of attack. Richard Sorge, whom we've seen many times in the regular weekly episodes, was a great asset for the Soviets. He'd been a Soviet agent since 1925, and together with Japanese journalist Hotsumi Ozaki, had a ring of spies that reached into the Japanese government. Sorge also got intel on German-Japanese relations from Eugen Ott, German ambassador to Japan, who was a close friend. Ott told Sorge in April 1941 that Germany had completed preparations for an invasion of the USSR. And in May, an old friend of Sorge's, the German officer Friedrich von Scholl, stopping in Japan on his way to a posting in Bangkok, reported to Ott that 170 to 180 mechanized divisions were ready to attack June 20th or a few days later towards Moscow, Leningrad, and Ukraine. War would begin with no declaration or ultimatum. Sorge had this information sent May 21st to Moscow. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill got an intelligence report in late March 1941 describing German armor moving en masse by rail from Bucharest to Krakow. To me, it illuminated the whole eastern scene like a lightning flash. The sudden movement of so much armor needed in the Balkan sphere could only mean Hitler's intention to invade Russia in May. Churchill had other sources than British intelligence too. He had Admiral Canaris, who we've seen many times, and the resistance within the Abwehr, German military intelligence. He had Paul Tummel, the double agent in Prague, and he reported that the Abwehr had hired specialists on the Caucasus and the Crimea. Churchill gave his intelligence to Stalin, though hid its sources, but Stalin would not have it. German Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess's bizarre flight to Britain in May 1940 reinforced Stalin's belief that Britain and Germany were going to gang up on him, that Hess had been invited over by British Secret Service. Stalin was still very suspicious of British intentions after Britain and France's plan, which they never went through with, to send an expeditionary force to help the Finns in the Winter War against the Soviets in early 1940. Which would have meant war between Britain and France and the USSR, and of course the widely publicized but aborted plans to bomb the Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus. But Stalin also got warnings straight from the Germans. Count von der Schulenburg, Hitler's ambassador in Moscow, warned him. Schulenburg and Stalin were on good terms, and Schulenburg was deeply disturbed that Hitler was going to violate the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, of which Schulenburg was one of the main architects. On May the 5th, he warned the Soviet ambassador in Berlin that the USSR was in mortal danger and to believe the invasion rumors going round. Stalin's reaction was reportedly, "Now faked information has reached the level of ambassadors." For a fact, on June 13th, Radio Moscow broadcast a communique reprinted in full the next day in all major Soviet newspapers, which stated that the rumors of Germany's intentions to tear up the German-Soviet non-aggression pact and to undertake an attack on the USSR are without any foundation. Such rumors are only clumsy propaganda by forces hostile to the USSR and Germany and interested in an extension of the war. The movements of German troops along the German eastern border have taken place for reasons having nothing to do with Soviet-German relations. And even Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering, on March 25, 1941, told his Swedish friend Birger Dollerus about the invasion. Dollerus told the British envoy in Stockholm that according to Goering, Germany would attack around June 15th. This information was passed forward. And there were hints at the highest level of them all. Now, Georgy Zhukov, chief of staff of the Red Army from February 1941 until during the invasion, wrote an article years later that appeared 13 years after his death in the September 1987 issue of the Soviet Military History Journal. John Waller writes, Zhukov remembered a communication that Stalin had sent Hitler in 1941 in which the Soviet dictator complained about heavy German troop concentrations in Poland and concluded, "It must be a harbinger of invasion." Hitler replied with a very personal letter to mollify Stalin. He explained that he had moved troops to Poland to avoid British airstrikes that were taking a heavy toll because they had been vulnerable to RAF attacks. Zhukov concluded that Stalin had been satisfied with Hitler's dissembling response as he clutched at straws of hope. Zhukov also knew that Stalin's subordinates kept worrying news from him so as not to alarm him. General Golikov reported the intelligence that he received that Germany had 100 divisions in Poland, but also reported he thought that report was a British plant to provoke the USSR. We've seen in the regular episodes that Golikov regularly passed on this kind of intelligence. as we saw in our June 22nd, 1941 episode, right up until the actual invasion. In spite of all the warnings about border violations and Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, Stalin still issued the directive to all his forces to avoid provocative actions of any kind which might produce major complications. But he did know how serious things were, of course, so he told his advisors throughout the spring that all the massing German armor would not attack until it had artillery support, that Germany would not want a two-front war, and that Hitler would not attack without giving an ultimatum first, and that would give an opportunity for negotiations. Stalin, through fear of a German invasion, was ready to make concessions to Hitler, even if it meant promising more critical supplies for Hitler's armies or even ceding territory to Germany. The Red Army was simply not ready for war. The Finnish War had proved this conclusively. Stalin needed to stall for time. In the meantime, he would be careful not to provoke Hitler. You can't call it a flood of information. It was more of a tidal wave. Josef Stalin was warned from literally all sides over a period of many months that Adolf Hitler was planning and organizing a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. And he was even warned just about exactly when that invasion would take place. His reactions, dismissing the intelligence as provocation or fake information, or believing the intelligence and then accepting Hitler's explanation for it, may be hard for many to accept. But remember the old saying, it's a lot easier to believe something if your job depends on believing it. And think it through then. It's a lot easier to believe something is not what it seems when the future of the country you run may depend on it not being what it seems. I mentioned Sam Woods as a source of intelligence from the Americans. Sam Woods has a very special connection to us at Time Ghost. Everything we film, we do at the house where he used to live. It is true. And here is Astrid to tell you more.
Thank you, Indy. According to Jon Bjork in his book Two Against Hitler, and as we have found out from the now declassified US World War II intelligence files, Sam Woods ran one of the major US and Allied spy rings. First, from the US Embassy in Berlin, later from the area where we are actually filming here, and eventually from Switzerland, once the US joined the war. His network included the Nazi-connected ex-professor of economics Erwin Respondek, and even peripherally Pope Pius XII. Who would have thought? With his spies and informants, Woods compiled the first detailed warning about Germans' plans to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. That Indy mentioned, but also information about other German military's operations, atomic research, and secret weapons. Significant to our upcoming coverage of Pearl Harbor, Woods and Respondek also captured extensive tips on all of the Japanese war plans in the Pacific in the summer and autumn of 1941. So, that's all nice and dandy, but you probably want to know what we have to do with the guy. Well, he was married to Wilhelmina Busch, who became known as the Dollar Queen of Bavaria. She was the 13th daughter of the Anheuser-Busch family and one of the richest women in that time in the world. She used to own the house Sparty and I live in, called the Tea House, as well as large part of the entire village here. In the 1990s, we took on the task of preserving the house for posterity and as custodians when the foundation that now owns it couldn't maintain it any longer. So, where we produce all this amazing content together with Indy is one of Sam Woods' old homes. Wilhelmina died of natural causes in 1952, and 6 months later, Sam Woods also died in a mysterious car accident, some difficulties with his brakes, which is why it would take until the 1990s and the declassification of his work for anyone to find out what his role in Second World War really was. We will make a special about Sam Woods and Wilhelmina at a future date. Would be great feature film, wouldn't it? If
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So give us the money. We will do
that
it.
in, but yes, that would be an awesome party. That would be a great movie. A Santa Wilhelmina movie. That'd be
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm doing the Wilhelmina, the Dollar Queen of Bavaria. Okay, there you
You're
go.
not big enough, honey. You're not big enough.
Yeah, she was fat as a house.
No, she was a hefty woman.
She was a hefty woman.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, carry on.
Okay, listen. I've made myself so pretty because I'm doing this specially for
Dora Faust.
Dora Faust. Sorry, I forgot your name because I'm so nervous.
She's been a fan of ours since the beginning. She was a great war fan before.
Take that again.
No, that was great.
No, that was great.
It's great with us
Shut up.
saying her name.
Dora Faust, we love you. I put on this wonderful tie because said you asked me whether it would be possible for a woman to really look hot in a tie. So, do I look hot, guys?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Shame you're married.
No, it isn't.
I mean, okay, 50-50 then. One of us thinks it's a shame you're married, the other one's totally cool with that.
Okay, bye-bye, love. Back to Indy.
If you'd like to learn more about the beginnings of Arvid Harnack's spiring, check out our War Against Humanity episode about the German resistance up to 1940 right here. And that is all for today. But for more of our awesome content, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. See you next time.